Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. Today is Election Day in Tennessee, where voters take to the polls to make decisions on state and federal primaries. There's also a bevy of local elections and measures to work out. So I'm going to ask, how have you been paying attention? Have you been paying attention to the upcoming general election? Some of you may answer, Khalil, of course I have. Others of you may be feeling a bit frazzled or fed up with the election coverage. I was recently asked by a new acquaintance, Khalil, what does it matter? Will my rent go down? Now, in full transparency, I too feel that the rent is too damn high. However, abstaining from voting will not help to create some of sort of rent stabilization or address any of the other things people feel is important. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is the most bewildering election cycle of my lifetime. And I'm sure for many of you would agree. The level of animus between voters seems to have increased, and the amount at an amount commensurate with voter enthusiasm. Now, people are shocked, excited, worried, fatigued, frustrated, and at wit's end trying to make sense of the changing election landscape. With 95 days until the general election, there's still time for more things to happen. And one can pretty much guarantee that something that gets us all talking will happen. So what has happened over the past 6-ish weeks? Here's a running list. On June 27th, CNN hosted a presidential debate between the then presumptive nominees, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Less than a week later, on July 1st, the Supreme Court issued a decision that granted Trump and the office of the presidency immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts in office. Many critics of that decision say it makes the president, that's any president, above the law. Now, locally, downtown Nashville was visited by the Patriot Front, a neo-Nazi group. There's more on that later. Then on July 13th, at a campaign rally near Butler, Pennsylvania, there was an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, causing widespread shock and concern over political violence. Since then, the Secret Service has faced intense scrutiny. That same weekend, Nashville was visited by another group of white supremacists. This time, it was members of the Goyim Defense League. The next week, from July 15th through the 18th, the Republican National Convention was held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That same week, on July 16th, Whites Against Replacement appeared and attempted to disrupt the Nashville Metro Council meeting. And in a surprise announcement on Sunday, July 21st, President Joe Biden announced that he is withdrawing from the presidential race and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris in the process of stepping down from the nomination. That's a lot of stuff, y'all. So how are you doing this election season? How are you adapting to the changes? What are you worried about? What are your hopes? We're opening up the phone lines to hear from you today. So you can call us at 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000 so we can get in and talk to you. Now, we're also bringing in a panel of experts so that you can call and ask your questions in hopes of trying to make sense of the times that can also seem a little nonsensical. So joining us today to take your calls and help us navigate the emotions and responses brought on by this super intense election cycle are Dr. Heather Alesh. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical director at the Nashville Center for Trauma and Psychotherapy. Dr. Dana Nelson, the Nancy Chair of English and Professor of American Studies at Vanderbilt University. And Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd, Professor of Political Science at Rutgers University. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Alexander Floyd, let's go with you first. Tell us this. How is the current political climate affecting your profession as a political scientist?
Well, as a political scientist, we live for elections, and especially the national presidential election. This time around, people are, in addition to paying attention to polls and what's happening with shifts in the state level, people are really, particularly those who are specialists in Black politics and race and ethnic politics, also going the extra mile to be in touch with community groups, churches, and other organizations who are on the ground to spread voter education be a part of seminars and workshops and make sure that people have information about what's happening in the moment. So this is an especially active time for us because we are absolutely community oriented and directed in the work that we do. So this is our time in terms of bringing our expertise to bear, but we have many of the same kinds of concerns as the general public as well, because there's so much, as you noted in the intro, that is in play, many things that are shifting, and we still have plenty of time in terms of doing what needs to be done, but no time to waste. And so we're very attentive, and you're trying to game out things and think through the possibilities and options during this time.
Dr. Nelson, as an American Studies professor, how is it affecting you?
For me as a scholar, it's making me feel a little weary. I wrote a book a bunch of years ago called Bad for Democracy, How the Presidency Undermines the Power of the People. And it makes a fairly counterintuitive argument, which is just that as the presidency, both symbolically and actually over time, has accumulated more power, and as people put more of their political energy into the sole office of the presidency, like we can all name the presidential candidates at the federal level. How many of us can name our local representatives? Mm-hmm. We've got a local election today, and I bet a lot of your listeners aren't participating in it because they haven't even had the energy to look, because so much of our energy is being consumed by the presidency. And insofar as the president is a winner-take-all office, it's turning democracy into a zero-sum game. So the more energy we put into it, the more it diminishes our democratic commitments. And I feel a lot of sadness about that. On campus, I do a lot of work. I've been working for the last decade or more, trying to figure out strategies to teach my students how to be calm and curious in the face of political difference. And I've developed a bunch of techniques that actually help them do that. I'm really proud to say. And I think that work helps them face moments like this with more resilience. So I'm proud of that.
Yes, I hope we get some questions where you can talk about remaining calm and curious and give us all some tips on that. Dr. Alesh, as a psychologist, how is this unusual election season impacting you and your work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think all election seasons bring up all kinds of feelings for clients, whether that be their anxieties or feelings of hopelessness or despair. And I think this particular election season, I feel like with each year, the more polarized we are presented with information, the more the algorithms make us polarized, the less connection is happening for people. And I love that you said calm and curious, because part of therapeutic work is learning how to step away from the parts of ourselves that feel so anxious and pulled in these hard directions and moving towards a calm and curious connection. So people are reaching out to get support because they feel pulled away, disconnected, and anxious.
Okay, so we're looking for calls. Give us a call at 615-760-2000. That's 615-760-2000 to tell us about how this election season is impacting you. Now, Dr. Alesh, trauma is a word that's thrown around a lot. It's a lot, particularly when people are talking about their responses. We're in the 24-hour news cycle. Social media is giving us, quote unquote, breaking news, or what we say. Can you help us define trauma and also differentiate between trauma and trauma response?
Yeah, I think for many people, trauma has become a buzzword. It's become something that's colloquially used to mean something that's uncomfortable. And when we actually define trauma, it has to do with violence or a threat of violence. And so if someone gets my order wrong at Starbucks, a trauma has not occurred. Maybe I have an internal response that makes me feel anxious and uncomfortable, and it brings up thoughts of a past trauma, or I have this reactionary response, but that's not because a new trauma is occurring. It's because my trauma response is occurring and triggering that sensation in my body that was similar to a sensation I experienced during an actual traumatic event. And so when we throw around the word trauma lightly, what we actually do is cause people to set really rigid boundaries, step away, and not engage in uncomfortable conversations.
And I'm thinking, what about when people get in conversations about politics? People get very emotionally tense. There's outbursts, there's arguments. People who were once very close, in love with each other, can become enemies, quote unquote, because of this politics. How can we adjust our trauma responses to hearing a particular political view that may not match with ours?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I'm a therapist, so I'm always going to advocate for folks going to individual therapy. And sometimes that is necessary in order to unpack, why am I having such intense trauma responses in response to things that perhaps don't need such a large response from me? And I think that being able to step back, being able to come at it from a space of, can I be calm? Can I be curious? Can I be kind of wondering, as opposed to immediately jumping to intensity and rigidity in our own thoughts and feelings?
Now, Dr. Nelson, at the beginning of the show, I read off some of the conflicts or events happening in Nashville and across the nation. And globally, there's conflict going on in Ukraine. There's conflict happening over in Gaza, over in the Sudan and Haiti. There's a lot for us to be worried about as far as the state of the world. You mentioned that you're teaching your students how to have good conversations and with people who disagree with them. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that instruction looks like?
Yeah, I'm big on counterintuitive wisdom, and one of the first things we work on is that we all believe our political positions are built from rational facts. We all like to bang each other over each other's heads with our facts, but actually our political allegiances come really instinctively through our deepest held values, and they're fundamentally emotional. And so when we're encountered with political difference, we either lean toward or away from it, and then we come up with post hoc reasons to support which way we leaned. So it's not only that our emotions are primary, but it's also that in political conversations, facts don't persuade people. People have the facts that persuade them because of the emotions they have. So when we're trying to persuade people, we have to realize fundamentally our facts won't do it, and that we need to create a congenial emotional environment. Nobody's ever been persuaded by somebody screaming in their face. We tend to be persuaded by people who we've come to admire. We find a way to lean toward them, and then their political positions start to seem more interesting, and we start to entertain them. That's how political persuasion happens. So to help my students get to that place, I teach them how to listen curiously. And I use a technique I learned from the journalist Amanda Ripley, who wrote a book called High Conflict. And she uses a technique called looping. So you ask somebody a question, you let them answer it, you repeat back to them what you understood them to say, and you make sure that they recognize what they said in your recapitulation of it. And then you ask them a question that goes deeper. I jokingly say to my students, this technique requires you to put a paper bag over your inner narcissist. Like the questions can't be, now what do you think about what I think about what you said? The questions really have to be things like, why is that position so important to you? Like, tell me a story behind why you feel that way. Like, who do you feel important in your life has those opinions? Why are you so attached to that? Why is that so pivotal for you? So that you start to understand them more deeply as human beings. You understand the stories behind the triggering political positions. And when you start to connect with people that way, everybody calms down. It's such a powerful technique. As you know, I've said to my colleagues, I can always tell when my students are getting good at looping, because the person being listened to starts to fall in love with the person doing the looping. It's so powerful to feel heard. And that has the great effect of slowing everything down and letting people connect as human beings, even though they recognize they might not connect across their political values.
Now, Dr. Alexander Floyd, I heard you laughing a little bit in agreement with what, was just being shared. Tell me this. I mean, right now we're looking at historical perspectives in this election. And it was mentioned, Dr. Nelson talked about facts, people ignoring facts. Political history are facts. Tell me two things. How can we come to understand and be in conversation when the facts are being disagreed upon, and also put into perspective of us what is happening historically, politically right now? Is this truly unprecedented, or have we seen tumultuous times like this before?
Those are both good questions. And yes, I echo what Drs. Ellis and Nelson said in terms of trauma being so used that we sometimes forget the meaning of it, and the idea that we actually are not left brain thinkers in the main. Even when we go to college sometimes, right? We are very much moved by our emotions. But the critical thing, and this is why universities and colleges can be important settings. They're not the only settings, but they are important because what we're supposed to be doing here is having those kinds of critical conversations where we're able to hold different ideas in tension, where we're supposed to have be able to have a range of conversations, including and especially difficult conversations, and bring to bear a range of experiences and perspectives. One of the things that I really love about teaching, especially when you have people from a variety of backgrounds, people who are from different parts of the country, different race and ethnic backgrounds, class backgrounds, some first-generation college students, and others who have a different background. They bring their perspectives to bear, and I really believe that it is important to protect those spaces, especially colleges and universities, in terms of that kind of value and opportunity that they provide. And that is something that has been under attack as part of this election season, the cycle, what's been happening with university presidents being brought before Congress. Those kinds of things and the nature of those kinds of things have really challenged the idea of academic freedom. And the precedents that people talk about, of course, go back to the McCarthy era. What we're dealing with in some ways is unprecedented. Sure, the challenges that we have certainly are, for example, in terms of climate change, just as one example. But politics is not only about compromise, it is about contestation. And so many of us were surprised, right, when some moons ago, but not too long ago, we had that fateful election with Bush and Gore. What happened there? There was a lot of controversy, and we had discussions about hanging chads and all of this kind of things. But historically speaking, we have had other situations in which the popular vote goes for one candidate and the electoral college, right, goes to another. And one of the most consequential of those, of course, happened after the Civil War in what was known as the Great Compromise of the watershed year of 1877, where we had a similar situation, and Rutherford B. Hayes was seated over Tilden. And part of what occurred was that in the Electoral College, they didn't have a clear majority, and there was a special body developed to deal with that deadlock. And that essentially brought about the major factor that brought about the end of Reconstruction as we know it. The deal that was made was that federal troops would be taken out of the South. And when that happened, then we had an outpouring of violence, the land set for Jim Crow segregation to take hold, et cetera. So part of what this has to entail is an educational opportunity for us to understand history, right? To understand, most people were shocked, right, about the Electoral College because it's something that doesn't typically come into play. But as a country, we don't select our leader by the popular vote, right? We have an Electoral College that is something that is getting greater scrutiny. What has really presented us difficulty, several things, right? We are in a moment where we have had political crises that have threatened our system and our basic institutions. We cannot forget the attempted coup that happened, right? Former President Trump, when he was in office, tried to stay in office. He was verbal about that. As political scientists, we study these kinds of things in other places. So we know it when we see it, right? And many people, even 6 months to a year or more, were pointing to some of the red flags, if you will, that were there. And so that is an important context that we cannot forget. And we have a U.S. presidential election that was challenged, not based on facts, right, but based on a desire to stay in office and people really taking on, right? I also am a psychoanalyst in training. And so in terms of the political theory and psychoanalysis piece, part of what we see happening, is that identification.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Doctor. I got a call right here. I'm going to go to...
Absolutely. Good. Great.
We're going to go to Steve in South Nashville. Steve, thank you for calling. What's your question, my friend?
Well, I just want to point out, I know you put today, I guess you called it Election Day in Tennessee, which it is primary election day. And I just want to say, I know you're talking about national elections. That's the headlines you referred to. But we got an important election today, that election for our U.S. Senator and our state representatives. And that's the issues that people concerned about, school vouchers, gun control, et cetera, that our legislature tried to deal with last year and didn't do much on either one. And so those are issues that affect us most closely, and that's what's happening today. You need to go, and Tennessee has a very low turnout for voting, but those are the people that affect us more than even the president. Is going to be our state legislators and even our U.S. senator. We're electing a U.S. senator this year, too, and there are several Democrats in the Democratic primary, and Marsha Blackburn, the U.S. senator, now has an opponent in the Republican primary. So those are issues that people need to be aware of and know that that's what we're voting on today.
Steve, thank you very much for that. But Steve, let me ask you this real quick, if you're still on the line. How many of the people in your community are active in local politics, in voting for state representatives and some of the representatives from the national delegation?
Well, it's hard to say. Don't ask me. I've talked to a number of people who've done early voting. I'm in the area of the Green Hills Library, and a lot of people vote there, but not been great numbers. But a circle of my friends, yes, are involved, and yes, do vote. But not everybody wears a sticker that says I voted. So It's really hard to know, how many people are participating. But I'm participating in the process. I'm actually a delegate to the Democratic Convention in Chicago, and so I've been involved in politics for many ways and many times.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your call, Steve. Yep. Dr. Alesh, Dr. Nelson mentioned that it's not just we pay so much attention, emotional attention, to the presidential election, yet we don't for the local elections that Steve just alluded to. These are folks that affect our everyday lives, which therefore affect our emotions. How can we emotionally look at our local leaders a little bit different so that we care and take action a little bit more?
Yeah, I think for many people, we have causes that are very near and dear to our hearts, depending on perhaps a group that we're a member of or an identity that is important to us. So, like, for example, as a queer person, I'm very attentive to local politicians and their views or how they may vote, what laws might they help pass or not pass that could affect me in my daily living. I'm also a parent, so paying attention to who's going to be on the school board and how that can affect us. So I think looking at what are some of your identities and things that are really near and dear to you, and then even just looking into, one or two folks that pull at those heartstrings can really get us involved in, and then get involved in work, nonprofit work, advocacy work, and then take breaks. Do both.
Take breaks.
Yes.
Well, we're about to take a break ourselves. We're going to take your advice. All right. When we return, we're going to take more of your phone calls to hear how you're adapting to this election season. Call us. Reach out at 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. No comment or question is too absurd because we're living in absurd times. We'll be back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Lake Alona, and this is Nashville. We are taking phone calls today. If you're calling, please let it keep ringing. We will get to you. We've got one person manning the phones, but trust me, we'll get to you. Because today we're talking about the whirlwind of an election season that we're living through. There's been many impactful events to occur this summer. We still have over a month left, y'all. So as we move closer to November, how can we temper our expectations, our emotions, our worries and fears about what some are calling the most important election of the modern era? I'm joined by a panel of experts who are going to help us with that. I'm joined by Dr. Heather Elesh. I'm joined by Dr. Dana Nelson and Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd. I do want to talk about something and switch the conversation to a little bit about this conversation about political violence. We've had an assassination attempt on former President Trump. People are really worried about political violence, but the conversation with it, particularly in the media, is not very robust, I think. Some people are afraid of talking about it normalizes political violence, and others feel that we have to talk about it because it is one of the many large elephants in the room that we face right now. I'd love to open this up to all three of you. How can we talk to each other about the tensions existing around the potential for political violence in a way that lowers the temperature? Dr. Alexander Floyd.
Lowering the temperature? Well, I think that it's important to focus on what is necessary to actually respond to it. We have a broader issue with violence in this country, including political violence, and the process that we need, and people have been trying to push the needle on this, has to do with gun control. Right? We need gun control. It's something that, is not a lost cause. The political effort and organizing that has to happen. One of the previous guests talked about the importance not only of elections. Elections are critically important at every level. At the same time, the need to organize to change hearts and minds and to push through public policy is critical. We also have to understand that, the kind of political violence is, something that we have to call out when we see it. We have to talk about its sources. The effort by folks to really say that it's not okay, right? It's not okay to talk about people in dehumanizing ways. Right. It's not okay to say that if someone doesn't agree with you, even in a very strong manner, that you can say anything about them, about their person, question their identity, question their citizenship, question, them and their very being. Because when we do that, right, we set up an environment in which people will want to lash out and will want to attack.
To that note, Dr. Elesh, you mentioned something we were talking earlier about people feeling, are you unsafe or are you uncomfortable? Talk to me a little bit about that in this scope of our conversation about political violence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of people, we struggle to know the difference between, am I actually unsafe in this moment or am I just uncomfortable? A lot of times we get those internal sensations of anxiety, increased heartbeat, these panic responses are happening, and our immediate thought that goes with that is, I'm unsafe. I need to end this conversation, or I need to lash out in violence in order to protect myself. And sometimes that's the case, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes we're just uncomfortable, but we're being triggered by our past trauma responses that are making us feel unsafe in that moment. So I think being able to pause, take our time to sit with information and not feel this sense of urgency that we all feel pulled to, that I have to respond immediately. I must have an immediate reaction to what this person is saying or doing. That's not usually necessary. Usually we can pause, we can reflect, and we can get back to a centered place so that we can respond with a bit more logic. Obviously, there's still emotion, but a bit more logic. And then checking ourselves internally, because if we truly are unsafe, we do need to take space and not engage. And it's not helpful to just continue with the back and forth engagement at that point.
All right, we're going to take a phone call. We got Rhonda in Nashville. Rhonda, thank you for calling. What's your comment?
Hi, yes. I just wish the candidates, no matter who they are, would focus primarily on the economy. People are going to do what they want to do. They're going to live like they want to live, whether it be straight, gay, whatever. You know, abortion rights, I feel like, again, people will do what they want to do. I wish we really could focus on the economy so everyone can prosper with that. And I wish everybody could get a little more thick-skinned. I feel like people can't really say what they need to say for fear of outlash that someone is offended. We've got to get thicker skinned. And I know a lot of times people have asked something genuine just to be interested in, and it's been taken offensively. So, you know, I don't know. I'm just in the crossfires of the adolescent behavior with debates have got to stop. But only the public can say, we're not listening to that. I want to know what you're going to do for the country. And then we're going to have to decide what we want for the country.
Thank you so much for that, Rhonda. Dr. Nelson, would you like to respond to Rhonda's comment?
I really love what Rhonda said because, you know, the great radical premise of democracy is that the people have the power, not the president, the people. And in big ways, it's really on us not to delegate the responsibility for how this goes to a presidential candidate, but to try to really model it ourselves, to try to give people grace, to step away from the tribalization of social media where we get approval for being really dismissive and judgmental of our political opponents, and to try to practice reaching out to our neighbors, to our friends, to our community, and asking them sincere questions about why they feel so strongly about their political beliefs, and listening to them and experiencing, like trying to find those points of common humanity and giving them grace. And I think if we all start doing that a lot more, that might be one of the counterweights to this impulse toward political violence.
Do you think there needs to be a willingness to engage in that? Because a lot of people seem very willing to stand on their own hill, disparage others without any form of consequence to that. You know, I feel like what can we do to become more willing to step into the arena to talk with people? Well,
I think, you know, I'm very heartened by the fact that there are so many organizations now. I was listening to Monica Guzman's Braver. I can't remember the name of the podcast. She and now I'm blanking everything. Braver Angels, Braver Way might be the name of the podcast. But she works with an organization that helps create settings in which people who are from different political backgrounds can have productive conversations across those differences. I think we're all hungry for it, but I think social media has trained us away from it, and it makes people from our opposing political tribes seem so dangerous and threatening that it's hard to imagine a space where we can actually practice and grow those capacities and skills. But there are a lot of organizations that are starting to do that work. And I think, you know, if you see an opportunity, sign up for it, because I think that those kinds of exchanges are life transforming. Like all of a sudden you realize, oh, wow, these are decent people. I'm never going to agree with them on topic X, but they're decent people. And it makes them seem a little less scary.
And more human.
Yep.
All right. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. We're talking this hour about the unprecedented election cycle and asking you, how are you adapting to the constant and bewildering changes? My guests are Dr. Heather Alesh, Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd, and Dr. Dana D. Nelson. We want to hear from you. You can give us a call at 615-760-2000. That's 615-760-2000. Give us a call just like Ian did from Clarksville. Ian, thank you for calling and thank you for holding. What's your comment, my friend?
Hey, good morning, sir. So I'm an active duty service member. Been in 14 years. I agree completely with what the doctor just said about having an open mindset and trying to understand each other. I do completely believe social media has drawn a wedge between us. I love when I'm able to sit down and talk to somebody and put my personal opinions aside and their personal opinions aside and just have good conversation. As far as what was said about 5-10 minutes ago, we don't get to see it on our level as far as local elected officials as well as the president. We just kind of have to put toe in line. But I do truly enjoy when I don't care what your creed, race, ethnicity, religion is. If I can sit down and you and I can have a civil discussion, I really believe we need more of that, sir.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Alesh, would you like to respond to Larry's comment?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think that that's a really good point, that we've really moved away from these interpersonal interactions and moved into our little silos, whether that be in social media or in actual day-to-day life. Something I suggest to folks all the time if they're feeling lonely and disconnected is to intentionally go to a space that makes you uncomfortable or different. Like if you've never taken the bus before, take the bus and don't be on your phone. Say hi to a stranger. See what happens. You're only on the bus for 5 minutes, maybe. That's fine. But now you've stepped out of your comfort zone and had a new conversation.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take one last break. If you're on the line, please stay on the line. We are getting to your calls. You can call us at 615-760-2000. We're taking this last break to hear what you think about the election cycle, the changes. How are you adapting? How are you adjusting? And what do you want to see changed? You can give us a call, 615-760-2000. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. We are taking your calls today to hear from you about your emotions and thoughts as we get closer to the general election in November. But as we just learned earlier, it's not all about the national election. Today is primary day here in Nashville and Davidson County. All right, my guests are Dr. Heather Alesh, Dr. Dana D. Nelson, and Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd. You can call to ask them a question or make a comment at 615-760-2000, 615-760-2000. We've got Larry on the line. Larry, thank you for calling. Thank you for holding. What's your comment, my friend?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. And I guess my question is the individual's ability to simply take on a philosophy that, to me, doesn't make any sense. And let me tell you why I say that. I was in a conversation with a group, and one of the gentlemen said, we might have another civil war. And I blew a gasket because I'm African-American, and I vividly remember colored only signs for bathrooms and water fountains. And it just blew me away that someone in this day and age would talk about a civil war. And I blew a gasket. And afterwards, I'm like, well, maybe I should have said, well, whose side would you be on and where would you come down? But it was too late. So it's just amazing that the individuals go.
Oh, unfortunately, Larry, please try to give us a call back, but I think I understand where he was coming from. Now, Dr. Alexander Floyd, you know, this language has been thrown out quite a bit. Civil war, civil war, civil war, which causes anxiety and worry in people, as Larry just examined and mentioned. What are some, When people throw that word out in language, that term out, how can we address it, the seriousness of what they're saying, but also not let it something that paralyzes the conversation or paralyzes us in our actions?
Exactly. No, the important thing, and I'm grateful for this call because I do want to say that some people do have cause for concern, right? But there's a difference between worry and despair on the one hand and concern and action on the other. And I think part of what assists us in handling and meeting this moment is to really have concern and action and not worry and despair. So we have the threat of rising authoritarianism in this country. We have people, for instance, the last time Trump was in office, I had students having different responses. One person, for instance, cried in class saying, "I'm undocumented. Will you protect me?" Right? That's a very real and present situation to have to deal with. We also have Project 2025 that's been put forth by the Heritage Foundation as a laundry list of what conservatives would like to do to reshape the country. We also have a political candidate, former president, who is speaking about violence breaking out if he is not elected. So those things have to be taken seriously. But it's really how do you respond to that? And how do you handle that? It's about having an assessment that we can use to address that. And I also would like to say that personally nice people can make dangerous choices, right? When we think about the rise of Christian nationalism, there's been a lot of discussion about that in the news. If you speak one-on-one with someone who, supports, stopping or is against abortion rights, abortion access, you may find them very congenial in some ways, have conversations, et cetera. They feel that this is the issue of their time, right? But the choices that people make are important. The conversations can happen, but they may not necessarily dissuade folks. But I do want to just put it out there during this conversation that there are things that are matters of concern and action, but not worry and despair, because the despair is really what is not going to get us the end results that people desire.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to a call from Betsy. Betsy in Nashville. What's your comment?
Oh, hi. Thank you for this great conversation today. My comment basically is I'm an older person. I'll say I was graduated from high school in 1973. So I do remember some of the violence of the 60s and so forth and so on. So those are big concerns for me, absolutely. But mainly what I wanted to say today was that I wish we would focus on educating ourselves, and especially in our schools, teaching civics and helping people understand how our system of government actually works and why it's important to vote locally, and what are the things we can do to learn how to have conversations and actual debates without devolving into personal attacks. I think it's just a skill that we no longer teach, and we are absolutely crying out for it in terms of the way we've become so polarized. So that's basically what I wanted to add in.
I appreciate you adding that in, Betsy. Thank you. Thank you so much for calling and giving us that really poignant insight. We're going to move on to another caller. We got Brad in Nashville. Brad, thanks for holding. What's your comment, my friend?
Hey, well, I'm really sort of hurt by the people that are close to me that have such impulsive and toxic political opinions and beliefs that, women who get abortions should be murdered by the state, or we need to deport all illegal immigrants on trains and buses. I find their political beliefs to be dangerous and abhorrent and anti-American, but there's still people that are close to me. And I am wondering, how do I keep my relationships with these friends and family members?
Dr. Alesh?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is one that many of us struggle with. And I recommend, so there's some great skills such as nonviolent communication techniques and using some of these ways to engage in uncomfortable conversations with folks. But the key is both parties have to be willing and accountable. And so being able to meet at a space where both parties are willing to engage in those conversations in respectful ways that don't involve personal attacks and name calling. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes the other party isn't willing to meet in that way. And that's where sometimes we have to step away and then find other avenues and other ways to have those conversations with folks that are willing to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for calling, Brad. We're going to move over to Courtney Johnston, Representative Courtney Johnston, Metro Council member Courtney Johnston. Thank you for calling. What's your comment?
Absolutely. It was just calling to remind everyone that it is Election Day today, and we are in the 5th Congressional District. I'm running in the Republican primary to unseat Andy Ogles, who, in my opinion, hasn't been present.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you so much. We're going to thank you for reminding us to go out to vote, Representative Councilmember Johnston. I really appreciate that. Like she said, go out and vote. It's a local election, but we also have national implications as well. Okay, we're going to move on to Kelly. Kelly in Murfreesboro, thank you so much for calling. What's your comment? I got about 3 minutes left.
Okay, hi. I just wanted to underscore the importance of both general elections that are happening locally, as well as taming down the rhetoric. I'm running for city council here in Murfreesboro as a direct result of the decency ordinance they passed that was focused on
Thank you so much. Okay, we're taking calls. It's not campaign time. We're leaving one more phone call. We got 3 minutes left. Laura in Murfreesboro. Laura, what's your comment?
I just want to say I think we've gotten away from politics and into human behavior, which is not the purpose of elections, whether local or national. I think when you start talking about women's right to abortion, that's a personal decision between that woman and her perhaps family and her God. That has nothing to do with elections in this country or politics in this country, in my opinion. And I think, we focus on those personal things and we get away from the business of politics, which is making the rules and regulations for this country. What should our taxes be? How do we support the people coming in who need to get across the border for fear of their lives? How do we do those things legally? How do we make laws that take care of those individuals as opposed to worrying about whether I'm gay or straight or whether I'm black or white or whether I'm, Baptist or Catholic, or do I go to church or not go to church, or, those kinds of things. We are into human beings' decisions, not politics. And we need to get back to politics. And what the rules need to be. Yes, get back to what we need to be talking about.
Thank you so much for calling and giving us that comment, Laura. So Laura's mentioning we need to get back to politics, what we're talking about, and stay away from the so-called culture wars that have dominated our political discourse and therefore have affected our feelings, lives, and emotions and relationships. I have just a minute left. I'd love to open it up to all of you to make comment, but Dr. Nelson, I'm going to leave it to you. What do you want to leave us with after this conversation? After hearing just a small sampling of what people in Nashville and the surrounding area, how they're feeling?
One quick thing. We don't engage in conversation across political differences just to find out the other person is nice, although that can be a solacing takeaway. We don't persuade people by judging them and giving them our facts. We persuade people by opening up human connections with them. And I'm still going to say, I think the best way to persuade people is to be open to them, to listen to them, and to develop the kind of relationship with them in which it starts to feel possible for them to come over to your side. And that takes time and care and connection.
All right. I want to thank you all for being here. And just listeners, I want to let you know we are doing this again next Thursday. In fact, we'll be doing this all the way up until General Election Day. So mark your calendars and charge your phones. You know you can get onto the phone, talk to our experts, talk to us, talk to your fellow Middle Tennesseans. Call us at 615-760-2000. Put it in your speed dial. Next Thursday, we're going to be having this conversation. I want to thank my guests for today's great conversation. Dr. Heather Alesh, licensed clinical psychologist at the clinical director at Nashville Center for Trauma and Psychotherapy. Dr. Dana D. Nelson, the Nancy Perot Chair of English and Professor of American Studies at Vanderbilt University. And Dr. Nicole Alexander Floyd, Professor of Political Science, at Rutgers University. Thank you again for this conversation. Really appreciate it, y'all.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, and thanks to you for tuning in and calling this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. Catherine Cece's took care of the phones. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. And if you want to call to leave us a message or a comment about today's show, call our message line. That's 615-751-2500, 615-751-2500. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's episode. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. We'll see you on Monday, everybody, and be good to each other.